It's time for Recipe of the Day. Happy Friday, we made it, and if you are feeling like celebrating, I have just the thing for you. Today, I am telling you how to cook filet mignon perfectly. And now I know that filet mignon is a fairly expensive cut of steak, but it is my boyfriend Marty's favorite cut. And so I am finding ways to make it a little bit less expensive. And one of the ways that I have done that is to try buying the entire beef tenderloin and then cutting the steaks myself and freezing them. And then they are a little bit more reasonably priced, especially if you can get the beef tenderloin on sale. And it does go on sale quite often. You get really nice filet mignon steaks from that. So I am actually going to put a link in the show notes for you for how to cut a whole beef tenderloin yourself into filet mignon steaks. You actually get the filet mignon steaks. You get some petite filet mignon from it. You get like a small roast. You get some really nice meat that's good for stews. So you get that one beef tenderloin and you get a ton of stuff out of it. So yes, I will link to how to do that. Or you can head to cookthestory.com, search for filet mignon, and you will find it there. But in today's episode, I am focusing on how to cook it, not how to cut it. So filet mignon is a well-known cut of steak because it's very tender, but also very lean. And that's because the muscle comes from an area that doesn't get worked very much. So it doesn't develop those tougher tissues, nor a lot of fat. So that's why it is a really interesting grilling steak, because it's tender without having all that fat. It has a milder flavor. It is not my favorite cut of beef. I am really partial to like a ribeye. Actually, I really like chuck eye steaks too. That's what I've been buying at the grocery store lately. I'm going to do a recipe for those on Cook the Story because I just think they are amazing and such a good deal. Although I sometimes think I shouldn't tell people about them because then they'll start upping the price, right? But anyways, chuck eye steaks are one of my favorites. Filet mignon is, like I said, one of Marty's favorites. Everybody's different about these things, right? Now, the other thing about Marty and steaks is that he likes his steaks kind of more like medium well done. And this has become really interesting for me because I have gotten to perfect cooking steaks a little bit more well done than I'm used to. Now, no judgment from anybody about the well done steaks. Everybody gets to have what they like best, right? I always think that. Like, I don't like my pasta al dente. I like it a little bit softer. And so I'm allowed to cook it a little bit softer, right? So he likes his steaks more well done, and I've been working on perfecting that. And I'm going to tell you one of my favorite things for this is to think about the temperature of the steak before you cook it. Now, a lot of people say to take their steaks out of the fridge 30 minutes before cooking them. I actually stopped doing that years ago when I heard Lynn Rossetto Casper on The Splendid Table talk about how it's actually not the best way to cook steaks. You want to have your steaks as cold as possible, actually, especially if you're cooking them to like medium or medium rare, because then if they're cold, it takes them longer to come up to temperature, which means you have more time to develop a good crust, right? So years ago, I followed her advice. I mean, always follow her advice. She is the expert on so many cooking related things, right? I followed her advice years ago and stopped taking them out of the fridge. But when it comes to doing a more well-done steak, it turns out that taking it out of the fridge first makes a lot of sense. In this case, we want that steak to cook more quickly because it risks burning on the outside or getting too dark on the outside before it gets to that medium well temperature inside. So bringing it up to room temperature a little bit helps with that. So I want to urge you, if you are somebody who likes your steaks more well done, consider taking them out of the fridge for a little while before cooking them. And on the other hand, if you are somebody who likes them a little bit rarer, medium or less, and you have been taking them out of the fridge as like somebody told you to a long time ago, taking them out of the fridge for a while, try not doing it. Try cooking them straight from the fridge. I promise it's going to make a difference. Okay, so then how to cook filet mignon perfectly. I did a side-by-side test of the two ways that I see done most often. One is to pan sear them on both sides in a heavy skillet, like a cast iron skillet, to the temperature that you want. The other way is to start it in the skillet on the stove and then transfer it to a hot oven. And I wanted to know if it was worth it. Like, does it make sense to do that extra step, preheating the oven, moving things over, or is it better to just do it in the pan the whole time? And I will tell you, I was surprised to discover that I liked the pan the whole time better than the oven. I found the crust and the sear was better on it. It kind of steams off a tiny bit when it gets into the oven. I'm not entirely sure why, but that was what happened. And I did a few different tests on it. Whereas that top of the steak, once you flipped it over, the side that was already seared, it stayed a little bit crustier when I kept it in the pan. Of course, it's also just easier to just do it in the pan and I'll have to transfer it to the oven. So there's that. And then the other thing I found is that it's easier to monitor the temperature and get it exact because you're just doing that heat on the one side. And especially for doing that more well-done steak for Marty, I can flip back and forth and try to get that steak to cook well in the middle without burning on the outside because I have that control that I can keep moving it. You see what I mean? So that was my favorite way to do it. So what I do is heat up that cast iron to medium-high heat. I season the steaks with just a little bit of salt, nothing else. Or, well, sometimes I do the dry brine in the fridge for a while, so then I don't need the salt. Now I will link to the dry brining steak recipe because that is a beautiful way to season steaks and make them extra tender. Then we're going in with 1 tablespoon of cooking oil into the cast iron skillet. I use grapeseed oil for this because it is one of my favorites. It lets you have a little bit higher smoking point than, say, olive oil and very neutral flavor. Okay, so that oil goes into the pan. Then the steaks go in once the oil is shimmering and you're doing 5 minutes without touching them. And then you flip them over. They should have a really nice crust underneath. And then you're cooking them for a different amount of time depending on how well you want them done. So for rare, it's just going to be about 4 minutes. For medium rare, 5 minutes. For medium, it's going to be 6 minutes. For medium well, 7 to 8. And for well, it might be as much as 8 to 10 minutes. And like I said, you can flip back and forth. Get a good sear on that second side. If it is to the temperature that you like, then you take them off and let them rest for a few minutes. If it's not, you can go back to that first side. That is totally allowed. And I will just say that I do actually like to use a probe thermometer when doing steaks quite often, especially if they're thick enough to kind of get it nicely into the middle. I put that thermometer in the middle. Mine has a magnet on it, so the magnet then sticks to the microwave over my stove, and then I can monitor it and take it off exactly where I want it, sort of 5 degrees under the finished temperature. And the list of temperatures is in the recipe that I am linking to. You can get that at cookthestory.com/ROTD, or go to cookthestory.com and search for filet mignon, and you will find it there. I like to finish the steaks off with some butter or a compound butter. I have a really nice steak compound butter that has some cognac in it. It is unbelievable. So good. But one thing that I've done recently that I think is just brilliant is to put the butter under the steak instead of on top of it. So what you're doing is you're resting the steak for about 5 minutes before serving it. At the beginning of those 5 minutes, get some of your butter or your flavored butter, thin slices, and put it underneath the steaks. Why underneath? Well, it's going to melt really nicely under there. And also, more importantly, it's not going to affect the crust very much under there. The top of your steak has that nice brown, crunchy, crispy crust, right? If you put any wetness on there, that's going to make it a little bit softer. You want to keep that nice and crispy. So instead, we put the butter underneath where things are a little bit softer and wetter anyways, and then you get that buttery sauce under the steak and no effect on the crust. Then when you're ready to eat, you do transfer the steak from the plate that it was resting on onto your serving plate. You're not taking all the butter with you, just the little bit that was sort of touching the steak, flavors a little bit underneath. It is so good like that. Okay, I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is March 21st of 2025. Oh, and I just realized that I missed the first day of spring. It would have been yesterday. Apologies, I was not on top of that. Well, today, March 21st, 2025, it is Friday, and I hope you have an amazing weekend. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.